So don't be afraid to use some of those mistakes that happen in class as an opportunity for your class to grow and to learn as well. What if I told you that some of the most effective teaching strategies you can implement within 60 seconds of your lessons? That's right. You don't need to spend an elaborate amount of time creating these dynamic lessons or fighting over the laminator or copier or cutting out decorations for your classroom. These are going to be quick strategies that you can help your students find multiple ways to practice retrieval, discussing, applying their learning, so that way it becomes more memorable and it makes it more impactful. Because oftentimes we get in that mode as teachers of just lecturing our students, telling them what they need to know, but we don't build in that time for them to make connections or to practice pulling information that's important. What do you remember from this? The goal for our students isn't to teach more. We don't want to keep repeating the same things. We want to find opportunities for them to connect, engage into what we're sharing so that they can own it and make meaning of it. This will help them be more successful with what it is they're learning. So today I'm sharing 10 quick tricks for you to implement into your lessons to increase student engagement. Trick 1 is turn and talk. Opportunity to quickly add into your lessons when you are talking about something and maybe you share an open-ended question. Give students a quick amount of time to turn and talk. Something that I really like to do to add helpful support is to put the question on the board behind me or somewhere where students can reference it. This will help students from wasting time and saying, what are we supposed to be doing? So if they have that question on the board, they can quickly share with their partner, connect to it, what they learned, and then you can have students share out what it is they learned from that conversation. What did they hear somebody else say? What are some ideas? And this allows students to connect with what it is that's being shared and not just absorbing information. So it changes the lesson from kind of this presentation and absorbing mode to being able to have a conversation with someone and make it more applying their learning. Trick number 2 is retrieval practice. This is a very quick one. You can ask students to jot down 3 things that they remember from the lesson, from the story, anything that you're doing. This will help students practice, okay, what was it that we were doing? It's going to help that recall. And oftentimes students don't have that recall built into lessons until they actually have to have a test. So they aren't making meaning of their learning as they're going, but maybe we'll have to cram for a test or just hope they do well. So by building in these recall or retrieval moments, this will help students to practice. And to level it up, you can send the kids to like 3 students or create 3 lines, have them write down one thing that they remember, and then you can create a board, see what patterns and things really stand out, and students are kind of teaching each other. Trick 3 is use movement. Let's be honest, it's really hard to sit and take in information, whether we're in professional development on our own. It's hard to just sit and absorb everything. So by adding a little movement, this is going to help students kind of take a break, physically engage with what they're doing. So 4 corners, gallery walks, these are really great opportunities for students to get up, walk around the room. Maybe they are jotting down some information from a gallery walk, or they're going to a corner to share a response that you've given them. So which character, I shared this kind of in my movement episode, but which character works best in this story, or which character do you enjoy the most? Very open-ended questions where students can go, discuss, reflect, and it just gives you an opportunity to kind of see where students are at. Trick 4 is visual anchors. Anytime that you can create something visual for students, it will take away some of that cognitive load that they have to take in. If you've been talking all day long, and then you ask students to do something, but there's nowhere for them to reference that information, that can be really challenging and just frustrating for students because they're trying to remember and solve. So anything that you can make visual is helpful. What's even better is if you include students in this process and have them create an anchor chart or some sort of visual graph that students can refer when they are working independently or working in groups. And it also reduces kind of the number of times that you're hearing, what are we supposed to do again? So by having visual directions before you send students off to work on their own, or, hey, we are going to continue focusing on using a Venn diagram. You have a Venn diagram on the board, kind of what's already done. And if you've done that as a class, that's going to be even better because they'll have something to kind of reference back to. Trick 5 is frequent connections. Have you ever caught yourself taking several minutes and notice that your students are starting to drift? Their eyes are glazing over, they're starting to shift their body. That's the perfect time to pause and ask questions that will cause your students to connect with what's going on. You may have to pull back a little bit if you've already lost them, but by asking them questions, it's giving them an opportunity to connect. How does this connect to something that we've already learned? What patterns are you noticing in this? Is there something that you've done that connects with this? Those kind of opportunities, those questions allow students to make personal connections. And when students are making personal connections to things, they're going to be much more meaningful than if you tell them, hey, this connects with this over here. You're doing that work for them and kind of taking away the power for them to connect and be able to make meaning of that learning. Trick 6 is student teaching, or be the teacher. This kind of spins your lesson on its head because oftentimes the teacher is the one who's sharing all the knowledge. But by giving students the opportunity to explain how to do something, that's already having them apply their learning. They're telling somebody else, they're teaching somebody else, which is you, how to go through that problem. And a great one to start with is error analysis. These are problems that are already wrong or something's wrong with it. So if it's an incorrect sentence students have to fix or a math problem that they're going through, this helps students to be more successful because they're analyzing where the problem went wrong, not necessarily their problem or that they got it wrong. And if you're building on this, your class is maybe a little shy, it's good to have a few students participate or have the class share out, as long as you've created routines or expectations that they're not going to shout over each other, but they're working together to kind of go through the process. That can really help students because no longer are they the ones listening, they're sharing out how to solve the problem. And that's a next level in understanding, right? If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, being able to analyze, explain something is much higher, more difficult than just recalling an answer. Trick 7. Strategic wait time. I'll be honest, this is the hardest one for me to learn. It was the hardest because as a student, I was one who didn't like quiet, and I would just raise my hand and say an answer just because I felt bad for the teacher to have to wait. Nobody was answering. But as I learned from a teacher perspective, that students really do need time to process. Not everybody's kind of following along, knows what the answer is going to be. They need that time to think, recall information, maybe connect it with something else before they're able to share a response. So it's important for us as teachers to provide that wait time for students if we want them to engage and participate. We can't have our lessons going, having everything timed out. We really need to build in some time for us to just wait. And if that wait time is uncomfortable, you can turn on some quiet music, just have that playing during that time. You don't need to turn it off, when okay, now share your answers, but just keep that, because sometimes just having something fill the space doesn't make it so uncomfortable. And if students really are hesitant, you can always have them turn to a partner, ask quickly, check with your neighbor what was their thinking too. And that might give them more of an opportunity to feel comfortable sharing out, because if we're making this change, we're used to just talking. It might be difficult for our students to then realize, oh, now I have to share out answers. My teacher's going to wait for me to share this out. So those are a few little ways. Adding in that music or checking with your neighbor can be powerful ways for students to engage when you're building in that wait time that maybe wasn't there before. Trick 8, exit tickets. These are wonderful ways to check for understanding, whether it's at the end of a lesson or just in the middle of a unit that you're working on. But ask students to answer a question. Maybe you have 3 questions, they just write them down, solve a problem, or just have them reflect. What's one thing that you learned? These are wonderful ways for you to reflect, to check for understanding, and to maybe see if some students need some additional support. Exit tickets really, there's lots of ways to use them, but they are great opportunities for students to share what they know and for you to differentiate if you need to. So if students really didn't get maybe the last portion of the lesson, maybe it went too long, maybe it wasn't as engaging as the first part of the lesson, you could re-review that, just restructure the next day's lesson for them to be more engaged into it. And even maybe provide movement or something so that they capture that point that was missed in a lot of the exit tickets shared. Trick 9, celebrate mistakes. These are hard, right? We aren't taught to celebrate the mistakes, the things that we do wrong. But one thing that I remember from school were the multiplication facts that I got wrong. I was so determined to get through them quickly, but there was always the ones, 7 times 8, that I struggled to remember. And it was very hard for me to recognize what the pattern was in that. That was the big thing that helped me, was finding patterns in things and remembering it. And I couldn't find a pattern with that. So I learned after many times I made that mistake just to memorize it, because sometimes mistakes, they also teach us things. That's how we learn from them. If we choose to learn from them, that's the other part of it, right? We need to celebrate when there are mistakes. And so using that error analysis that I shared before, those are great too. It's okay to use mistakes as a way for us to grow and learn. Trick 10, the 1-minute summary. Before moving on, before changing, transitioning from one lesson to another, give students a minute to summarize their learning. They can do this on a Post-it. Maybe you have a journal that students are doing this in. But have them write down a few facts, sketch a picture, or explain a concept or one key takeaway that they learned from that lesson. This quick reflection is going to allow students to remember what it is, practice that recall, and share out something important that they learned from the lesson. This allows them to have those sticky moments, create meaning from what was, because a lot of times we just move through lessons and we don't give them that opportunity to, okay, what can we take away? What can we apply? When students are regularly recalling information, discussing ideas, or applying their learning, they're much more likely to remember it than if they're just waiting to cram for that test or work really hard to study. We're slowly building opportunities for them to remember information. So again, engaged classrooms, they aren't built by creating bigger and better lessons. They don't have to be louder, right? We're looking to be intentional in our teaching, finding simple ways in our lessons to pause and give students those opportunities to connect to what we're teaching and make it meaningful. I'd love to hear from you. Which of these strategies do you already use, and which ones are you excited to try? Let me know in the comments below. Of course, you can always like, share, and subscribe as we continue on this Engaged Classroom series. With that, I'll see you at the next one.